This is the Changed Physician, episode 221. Well, Kevin, do you want to split off into a second part for this conversation?
Sure, we can do that.
So what would you say is, like, if you were to pick out like 3 random things that obviously we know this can be very complicated when it comes to sex, and it's not just, a penis and a vagina, like, and in a heterosexual sense. But if you were to, like, what are the first things that come to your mind when you think how people can spice up their sex life?
Crotchless underwear.
What was that?
No, I'm joking. It just came to mind.
I didn't hear. I couldn't even tell what you said.
I said crotchless underwear.
Well, I love that response though, because that would be the typical thing, right?
It is the typical thing.
To spice up your sex life, you need to get some toys, do this. I mean, if you Google that topic, that's what you're going to get.
That's what you're going to get. I mean, I would say this. I would say communicate with your partner. And if you are unpartnered, communicate with yourself. Why? Why do you want to spice it up? What's not great right now? What could be better? What could be interesting for you? What does your partner want? You have all the answers you need if you could just communicate about the damn problem. That, and then I would say the clitoral suction air device things are truly God's gift to female orgasms. So
okay, so explain.
If you're gonna buy anything, go get one of those things. So
okay, explain for the viewers and me.
Okay, so we've got your old school vibrators and dildos. They're usually phallic in nature. They go into the vagina. They're rumbly. That's great. There are these new kids on the block I call them clitoral suction devices, but some people will call them airwave pulsation things. They're basically like they kind of like vibrate on the clitoris. So nothing goes. You can get ones where things go in the vagina, but like it's really the clitoral head gets all the attention, and it's insane. I literally need to find the person who invented these and just have them on my podcast and be like, tell me everything. I'm fascinated. WeVibe makes one. WeVibe Melt is amazing. The Womanizer is another one. A lot of companies have them now because they're freaking amazing. But if we're looking at orgasmic equality, and again, back up for the people in the back, orgasm's just one marker of pleasure. Once you make it a goal, then it's goal centric and it might fail, but let's decide that orgasm is what we want to be equal on. Really prioritizing the clitoris, because the clitoris is the penis. And I love the metaphor of like rub a guy's scrotum and he's like, well, yeah, it's kind of, maybe that's nice, but like it's not going to get me off. It's like it's really close, but it's not the thing that's going to give him an orgasm. And that's how the vagina is. It's like it's really close, but it's not the thing that's usually going to give her an orgasm.
Yeah, I mean, you would say it's almost like you need to get the clitoris or the penis really excited for the other parts when they're touched to actually be kind of synergistically, I guess you could say. They would be more responsive if the other parts are taken care of first.
Well, I mean, that's the whole, like you've got to love like the evolutionary biologist people, right? Because they're trying to like go back in time and be like, why do we put a clitoris on the outside? Pigs have clitorises inside their vaginas, right? So we're like, well,
didn't know that.
So, but then you're like, well, why is it there? And it's like, well, it's super important, right? Because men have nipples, because nipples are super important. We're not just going to get rid of it. So why is it important? Maybe it's important for bonding. Maybe it's important for her to be like, yeah, I dig this enough that I'm actually going to let you inside of me, right? Like her pleasure really does matter. And these days and age, especially, I mean, even in medical textbooks, it's completely ignored, right? Yeah. And so it's like, to be like, it's there for a reason. It's freaking out in the open, and we still ignore the crap out of it. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. I just think about just the rest of I mean, United States is one thing, but even the rest of the world, there's just a tremendous dominant. And I don't know if it's just because, testosterone has more of the aggressive kind of nature to it. I mean, we all have a certain number, amount of all these hormones, but obviously the preponderance of the testosterone, I would think, creates that drive. And plus it's sitting out there physically in front of their face versus the clitoris is usually hiding compared to what a man is experiencing. So you would think the more dominant or more aggressive person would be the one that has it in hand since they were a child. And then the testosterone that elevates throughout the teenage years, that would be why there's a dominant kind of in the culture in general, whether it's US or other places. I think it's very common that these are the male is going to be focused on. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, it's just, I mean, sex is a very patriarchal centered, right? Like the only reason a woman has it is because she's gonna have a baby, right? We what do you call a woman who likes sex? we call her a bad name.
Yeah.
Right. So we've completely controlled the dialogue when it's like, don't want it, don't want it just for fun. We'll shame you for that. So it's really society's role of keeping women, again, it's all like, what are you going to do when we've got a woman who enjoys sex? I don't know, but we probably shouldn't let it happen. But to that, it's like, I meet these people rarely in my clinic, but like I'll come across a woman who's like so sexually confident. She'll eat men for breakfast. She's got so much power. It's like, it's insane. And like when I see her, I'm just like, whoa, that's what it looks like. It's insane. Like, she's confident. She knows what she wants. She knows what she doesn't want. It's incredibly attractive. Yeah. Incredibly attractive. But we're not taught that that's a role model by any means.
Yeah.
Well, and that's getting into power dynamics, right? And there's a significant amount of and you frankly of control. And when you kind of look at through history and how we have historically treated women in most cultures was much more like chattel or property. Mm-hmm. My mom would say that our views, she may not be using this for sex, but she would use it about many of our cultural norms has been tainted by the Puritans coming in and saying we shouldn't enjoy anything. And that hypocrisy is the thing that just really, I think more and more about this stuff, I think, is because I have a daughter, right? I should have been thinking about, I grew up in a household full of females and things, but it never really hit me until I had a daughter. And it's like, what the hell are we doing when we use these words and we're somehow saying for the male, it is okay to have sex and feel pleasure. And yet in the same dialogue, we're not supposed to, women are not. I mean, that just, it really upsets me on a foundational level. Because I love my kids and I want both of my kids to have healthy sex lives. And I don't want this shame or there's perception of shame in society to say otherwise. So I just had to get that out there because the hypocrisy when it comes to this stuff, it absolutely drives me crazy on the word use. Like what you said, a man who loves sex, that's perfectly okay. But a woman who loves sex, well, there's going to be a couple examples and we're going to say, well, yeah, that's, some people say, well, they're special, but a lot of people are going to say, well, she's, this or that, or she's weird or she's outside the norm. And there's probably some people that would feel threatened by that, like men that would feel threatened by a woman that is sexually powerful.
Yeah, well, and a good example of like the kind of male dominant or male normative of this is like, if you think of a heterosexual relationship, we've got a desire discrepancy, right? If she's got the lower desire compared to him, she's the problem. If she's got a higher desire than him, she's got a problem, right? She's got a problem no matter where she lies, because we're really comparing it to like, this is what the relationship needs or wants, is what his desire is. And once you look at that, you're like, oh yeah, no, she can't win. So just to empower her and be like, oh yeah, no, desire is normal. Desire discrepancy is normal. It's learning to talk about it to figure out what works for the relationship. What do people need? But going back to your, like, once you see the hypocrisy, it's like, it becomes unbearable. I went to an Ishwish conference this past spring and it was in Texas. It was in Dallas.
What's Ishwish?
Ishwish is the International Society for the Study of Women's Sexual Health. And so now they've since then, because Texas has done some things that aren't so pro-female, they're never going to have a conference in Texas again. Ugh. This is their last one. But so I flew into Texas. I don't live in Texas. I flew into Texas. So this is what I noticed, which is very different from where I live. I live in Washington State. So abstinence-only education is the standard. Now, severe restrictions on body autonomy. You actually can't own more than 3 vibrators in Texas because it's illegal, because then you're trafficking sex. So we've got all... Yeah. What? Yeah, well, it used to be 1 until somebody got busted and she was like a kindergarten teacher. And they're like, we should stop busting these really nice kindergarten teachers. Let's raise it up a little bit. So now it's 3 to 5. The legislature had to decide how many vibrators is okay.
There's a law.
There's a law.
I had never even heard of this.
Which was changed because a very nice person got busted for having 1, and they were like, maybe that's kind of ridiculous. But point being, we've got all of this control on women's sexuality.
Yeah.
And then I land and I'm driving to the hotel, and there are ads for sex stores on billboards. There's ads for, you know, sex toy shops on billboards. There's like scantily clad people on billboards. And I'm like, between the airport and the hotel, there's like naked sex advertisements in a place that's more restrictive and abstinence only than a lot of the country. And I'm like, what a bunch of, like, be all or none. But don't put sex in my face and then, you know, say we're not going to teach you how to protect yourself or not get pregnant or not get infections. And we don't have those billboards in Washington State.
Yeah.
And so it was like, I was very noticeable of like, wow, this place is nuts.
It is. Amen to all that. You know, I was going to say, because one of the things I just wanted to get off my chest, I'm like, how can you think about the control dynamic and the hypocrisy and stuff? And I think, well, as a female, like, if you wanted to exert control over a man, it's hard to be aggressive or control with a whole versus like a man who has kind of this weapon, so to speak, just something you can insert into somebody, like just like the visual like sense of power. It's, I don't know, like even if that woman you're speaking of has this dominance and has this control, there's obviously a man has to, if it's a, you know, female male thing, has to get the erection for her to have that experience. But it just, you could see how it can be hard for people to like change that visual of what would be the dominator, which would be probably the male penis. I'm sure there's a lot of other examples you give that it's not just that. But anyway, any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, you know, and I say it in my book of like, sex is a weapon. You know, like sex really is a weapon. It's a weapon of mass destruction. It's a war crime, right? Like sex is a weapon, and I never want to downplay like, hey, it should just be wonderful for everybody. Like there's a significant amount of people, any gender, any sexual orientation, that have gone through horrific abuse, sex-based, right? And to not ever mention that when I'm like, hey, we should all be like equal and liberated, and it's just only this great thing of like, there's a really dark side to this. And I think that is why it's so challenging for so many people. But I always think education is empowerment. Education is empowerment. Teaching people how their bodies work is empowerment. Teaching people how to say no as best as they can is empowerment. Teaching young people the role of alcohol on inhibition and lack of ability to have consent is empowerment. So it's like, even if you don't want to take me at my like, oh, go have amazing orgasm. Like, if you don't want to take like all of the like woo-woo stuff of it, be like, there is so much good education that's protective. We know, we have data. If we teach young kids the proper medical terms for vulva and scrotum and penis, if they were to get assaulted, they're more believed because they're saying words that adults know, and they're more likely that the adult's going to help them just by teaching them body parts.
Yeah. And
that needs to be shouted from the ceilings, right? That when education now is protecting our youngest, you know, because that the narrative is, instead, if you teach anybody anything about sex, then like you said at the beginning of the interview, we're gonna disintegrate a society. And when really it's the more you educate people, the more protected they are, like you said, the more likely they are to know what is and what is not appropriate, say if they're young children. The ones I'm remembering, and I can't cite a source on this because it was a long time ago, so to correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the things I remember reading about like sex ed, like appropriate sex ed, meaning like full sex ed, not the weird stuff that we were talking about. They didn't find a dramatic increase in the amount of kids having sex.
That's right.
I think there was some increase maybe in oral sex, but penetrative penis and vagina sex, PIV, like you say, didn't. So if that's the goal, as a lot of these, you know, conservative, and I don't even know what that means anymore, but these controlists want to, then maybe we should educate people so that we don't do, or there's less of this activity that you think is so damaging. Now, not my viewpoint, but, you know, I'm kind of putting that in, framing that way.
Well, I mean, that's the hypocrisy of Texas, right? Because if you look at Europe does a much more wonderful sex education of like consent, talk, make sure you like the person, make sure you know who the person is, make sure, you know, you feel safe, all that stuff. And to prevent pregnancy, do this. If one person wants to wear a condom and the other doesn't, this is how you can navigate that. Like really useful tools, right? And they have a very low pregnancy rate, a lot lower than America in general. And then if you look at Texas pregnancy rate, where they have abstinence only and you actually have to opt in to sex education instead of opt out. So there's opt-in states and there's opt-out states, right? Texas is an opt-in state where it's not just abstinence only. They have a much higher, because these kids don't know what the hell, they don't know how to get pregnant.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so the consequence is actually the opposite of these, I would say well-intentioned, like, yeah, let's try to not have people have babies who are young and unprepared. Well-intentioned. But we have to give people education so they can be empowered to do that.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is that you can't whitewash history. You can't like take away information and prevent people to understand and expect something better to come of it, and have to let them kind of reinvent the wheel, so to speak, and get the wrong education. And not to mention the whole controlling thing. That's another topic. It's all related, but yeah, there's sex trafficking going on. Like, if you don't empower people, you don't help them understand things, not only for their, like you said, the woo-woo, for your wonderful marriage. There's so many layers of, you're protecting them from so many other things by understanding and knowing these things, earlier than later.
Yeah.
So.
100%.
Yeah.
It's that's why this topic is so big for me. I'm like, this is everything. This is like politics and the world and religion and your schools and your parents, and it's like such an amazing topic, because this topic involves everybody.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, the more we can have dialogue about it, hopefully the better we're just going to help everybody, no matter what their current life situation is.
Yeah, you don't hide things from people. It's not going to prevent things from happening by just not talking about it. So I'm glad your voice is out there, and you're doing your podcast, and you're using your own voice for your audiobook and your book. It's awesome.
Saying Viagra the way I want to.
That's right. Writer's privilege.
Yeah. Exactly.
Oh, Kelly, we're going to have you back on, because I know you have to go very, very shortly here. And I have about 5 other topics I want to discuss. And I don't want to even open my mouth now, because I want to have those conversations, and rather just kind of not be able to have what are really important, really interesting, really, really about life. So I appreciate what you do, and I'm so glad that you came back on the show today. And I really hope that you come back on the show again, because we have some other topics that at least that Melissa wants to talk about.
Always blame me. Your co-host is always the problem.
Air quotes.
Yeah.
But can you tell us where's the best place for people to find you? And could you mention your podcast again, which anybody interested in the topic should be subscribed to and listening to?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. You Are Not Broken is the podcast. It's on all major platforms. Amazon's got the book, You Are Not Broken, Stop Shoulding All Over Your Sex Life. And then I'm most active on Instagram, Kelly Casperson, MD.
Awesome.
Love it. Well, awesome. Well, thank you again for coming on to the podcast. And for those of you listening, if you have not heard about The Change Physician, go to thechangephysician.com. You can join the community, whether you're, Kevin's making those googly eyes, whether you're a physician or a physician ally. We'd love to see you there. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Take care.
Stay well, folks.